Now to do a comparison of literacy skill supply in the territory against the demand that the economy creates. Economically, it's important that supply and demand be roughly in balance, and ideally a small surplus of supply to allow the economy to adapt to any growing demand. We'll start with looking at the distribution of jobs by literacy skill proficiency in the territory. The right-hand chart shows that the biggest number of jobs in the territory are at literacy level 3, a much smaller percentage at literacy level 2, and fairly large numbers at levels 4 and 5. So the demand in the Yukon actually matches where we think we need to be for the territory to be competitive nationally and internationally. If we turn to the left-hand panel, it tells a slightly more troubling set of facts. 78% of the jobs which Aboriginals hold in the territory are actually at level 3 and above. Like the general population, the biggest number of jobs are at level 3, but there are no jobs at level 5 and a larger percentage of jobs at level 2. These data imply that systematically Aboriginal workers in the territory will have lower earnings, be more likely to be unemployed, have less access to adult learning opportunities, and in general will suffer from disadvantage because of the link of literacy to outcomes. So the question is the supply there to meet that demand? And we have a projection of literacy skill supply in the territory. The left-hand panel shows the projected numbers of people at each skill level out to 2016. And what we see is a steady decline in the proportion, in the numbers of level 1 and 2 people, and a balance or stability in the numbers of level 3, 4, and 5 workers. If we go to the right-hand panel, it tells a slightly different story. Currently, about 40% of all adults in the territory are at level 1 and 2, so have skills below what we think they need to compete. And this proportion is going to be stable out to 2016. So were demand to rise, which is something we want to happen, the supply of skills will not be able to keep up and shortages will be inevitable. If we turn to now utilization, so how much does the economy make use of the available supply of skill, we see quite a complex pattern. At the Canada level, supply, literacy skill supply and demand are roughly in balance. In Nunavut, the jobs that are there in the territory demand 103% of the skills that Aboriginals have to meet that demand. In the NWT, between 96 and 97% of the available supply is used. So there's room in the NWT for demand to increase to use what's already there and has been created by the education system. In the Yukon, it's only using slightly less than 96% of the available supply. So by using the remaining 4% that goes unused, you could realize relatively rapid increases in wages and GDP per capita. The point of these differences is that the public policy response has to be fitted to the nature of whether the economy in a particular province or territory is in shortage or surplus. We now turn to look at utilization of literacy skill supply at a deeper level, in this case a series of charts that compare the skills of people at each level with the number of jobs that are at that level. We begin by looking at band members on reserve in the territory, and what we see very quickly is that there's a surplus of people at level 1 and level 2, so more people with those skills than there are jobs for them to inhabit, and shortages of level 3, 4, and 5 people, particularly level 3, where those jobs exist that demand that level, but there aren't people to fill them with skill levels that are high enough. If we move on to look at band members off reserve, much the same pattern, surpluses at level 1 and 2, shortages at level 3, 4, and 5. This implies a level of economic inefficiency in which the skills of the workers are not well matched to the demands of jobs. And finally, looking at other Aboriginals off reserve, mostly Inuit living in the far northern part of the territory. We have a much smaller surplus of level 1 people, a huge surplus of level 2 people, and shortages of level 3, 4, and 5 people. Pushing the utilization story even further down, we now take a look at the fit between the actual demands of people's occupations and the skills they have. And what we see is over 52% of all workers in the territory are in what we call literacy skill shortage. The skill level they have is below the level identified as being needed for adequate and satisfactory job performance. So this is a big economic problem. About 30% of workers in the territory are in literacy skill balance. They have just the amount demanded by their occupation, something that gives them no cushion upon which to rely should skill demands rise. And finally, about 17% of the population have literacy skill surpluses that are not being put to economic ends, and so creating demand that would soak that excess skill up would yield impressive earnings increases. If we compare the Aboriginal populations in the territory, in this case band members off reserve, we look at how much more likely they're likely to be in literacy skill shortage, and they're 8% more likely than the non-Aboriginal population. So 60% of band members living off reserve have lower skills than their occupations demand. And they're much less likely to be in balance or in surplus. If we turn to look at Aboriginals off reserve, the same percentage, 8% more than the non-Aboriginal population, are in shortage, also much less likely to be in balance or surplus than the non-Aboriginal population. So collectively, these skill shortages imply that Aboriginal workers in the territory will be the last to be hired. When they are hired, they'll earn less. They'll be much more likely to be laid off and put into unemployment, and they'll get much less access to adult learning opportunities in the workplace. This impairment of their labor market success will impair the performance of the overall economy, so we as citizens and as governments need to worry. So now I'm going to turn to talk about what it is that you'd have to do to fix the shortages of skill that are evident in the population in the Yukon. What benefits could be had if you invested enough to eliminate literacy skill shortages, given the learning needs of different parts of the population. We begin with the startling fact that 1,950 out of 4,600 Aboriginal workers in the territory are in literacy skill shortage, a very high percentage. The good news is that most of those workers are not illiterates. They actually fall into literacy market segments C and D, who are workers who can read, who are fluent in automatic readers, but who don't possess the cognitive skills needed to master tasks at level 3, 4, and 5, where we need them to be in order to be competitive in national and international markets. So the bad news is big numbers. The good news is, although there are a lot of workers, each one of them would need only a little bit of remedial education to move them to level 3. If you look at the distribution of learning needs in the territory, we estimate that it would take $6 million to bring all band members up to the levels demanded by their occupations. A big bill for a small territory, but this investment would yield very large returns. The investment in literacy would precipitate a growth in productivity, which would in turn precipitate a growth in earnings of those workers that would in turn yield rates of return anywhere from 100% to 300% in increased earnings for each and every year after the problem was fixed. A good investment by any measure. So having established that literacy investment is important, the question arises, where would we put the money if we had it? And we've created a series of literacy snapshots for policymakers and practitioners to decide where their money is best invested. The first one I'll show you as an example is for Whitehorse, where the economic demand for literacy skill is actually quite high. They deserve a ranking of A, and their 25th out of 328 similar-sized communities in Canada. Whitehorse can rely on about 5.5 million literacy points that they could put to economic use, and the average skill level of an employed worker in Whitehorse is 310, which is very high up in level 3, and so it augurs well for the ability of the Yukon economy to compete. They use a startlingly high percentage, 75% of the available supply, so this is good because it represents economic growth, but there's no room for that to grow very much more without causing other economic problems. Fixing the adult literacy skill shortages in Whitehorse would cost $4 million, about $835 a person. That investment would precipitate a $27 million increase in earnings, so put about $5,100 more in the pockets of each worker that participated in skill upgrading. And another $19 million could be earned were the literacy skills shortages used up, find a way to increase demand enough to make sure those skills were used. So by way of summary, I think we've established that literacy skill is important to Canada's economic development and social progress. It's the cause of most of the inequality that we see in Canada, in that low literacy skills have a huge impact on people's labor market and social success. And this is true in the Yukon as well, where large percentages of workers have lower skills than they need to be fully competitive. And this is particularly true of the Aboriginal populations in the territory. Fixing the literacy problem in the Yukon would cost a fair bit of money, $6 million by our estimate, but it would pay huge dividends economically were someone to make that investment. We hope that the individuals, employers, and government of the Yukon territory will use this data to try to fix the problem to the betterment of the entire population. Thank you. Want to know more about literacy? Go to any of the following websites shown on the screen: the website for Data Angel, the website for Statistics Canada, the website for Bow Valley College, or the website for the Canadian Council on Learning. You'll find out about how important literacy is to Canada's future economic competitiveness and our collective well-being. Thank you.